They say the human voice holds truth. But what happens when someone's final warnings are dismissed as mere fear? In January 2013, at HMP Hewell, a high-security prison in Worcestershire, England, a young man behind bars wrote a letter. He did not write about legal appeals or complaints about prison conditions. Instead, he wrote about something far more serious, that his life was in danger and that he feared he would be killed. The letter read, "Basically, I was supposed to have been transferred to Birmingham due to conflict. I have told officers several times that my life is in danger due to me having trouble with other prisoners. Nothing seems to be getting done. Next time it could be fatal." That letter was placed in the complaints box and then ignored. For days later, he was brutally attacked, and 3 days after that, he died. His name was Adnan Rafiq, and he had foreseen exactly what would happen. He had tried to warn the authorities, but his words went unread, his life left unprotected. Adnan Rafiq was 22 when he arrived at HMP Hewell, a prison that housed some of the United Kingdom's most violent offenders. He had been arrested on burglary charges and was awaiting trial, isolated from his home and surrounded by men already convicted of serious crimes. The prison wing was tense. Rival factions held grudges. Rumors spread quickly, and violence was never far from the surface. Despite the fear, Rafiq attempted to shield himself. Guards and fellow inmates noticed that he grew increasingly anxious, particularly after having been assaulted twice. Suffering a broken nose and cheekbone, rather than retreating into silence, he acted in an unusual way. He wrote about the danger he faced and attempted to communicate to the prison authorities the seriousness of the threats against him. His letter described how certain prisoners had targeted him and how repeated warnings to staff had failed to result in action. "I have told staff, because next time could be fatal," he wrote. In the bureaucracy of the prison system, urgency does not always translate into immediate action. The letter was confidential, intended to be read by a designated officer, but that officer was absent at the time. For days, it gathered dust, unnoticed and unheeded. Meanwhile, tensions continued to rise within his wing. Some inmates mocked him for his complaints, while others perceived his warnings as weakness. As days passed, his fear intensified rather than diminished. On January 28th, for days after submitting his letter, Rafiq was violently attacked in his cell. He was punched, kicked, and stamped upon over a dispute about an alleged theft, sustaining multiple skull fractures. Prison staff responded, but by then the injuries were severe. He was rushed to hospital, where he survived only 3 more days before succumbing to his wounds. His death confirmed in the most tragic way the accuracy of his own warning. Rafiq's letter was not the first indication that he was in danger. Staff at Hewell were aware of previous complaints and the aftermath of prior assaults. Yet his formal warnings, explicit and urgent, were left unread at the critical moment. Investigations later revealed multiple breakdowns in procedure. The prison's complaint system was rigid. Confidential letters could only be opened by a named officer. If that officer was absent, the letter remained unopened. Instead of being redirected or returned, it was effectively lost. In the days leading up to his death, Rafiq spoke to fellow inmates and staff about his anxiety and need for a transfer for safety reasons. Some guards recalled hearing him voice his concerns, yet none took formal action. Other prisoners later testified that Rafiq's desperation was palpable and that he truly believed he would be harmed if nothing changed. In the prison hierarchy, warnings from inmates about imminent danger were often discounted. Assumptions that prisoners exaggerate threats to gain favors or transfers create a systemic bias that proved deadly in this case. On the day of the fatal assault, another inmate, Barry Mundell, attacked Rafiq within a confined space of cell. The confrontation escalated quickly, with repeated punches, kicks, and stomps, leaving Rafiq gravely injured before guards intervened. Medics attempted to save him, but the injuries were catastrophic. He was transferred to hospital, where he died 3 days later. Only after his death was a letter discovered, still unread in the complaint box. Staff read it and were confronted with the full gravity of his forewarning. Every word in that document had been genuine, earnest, and ultimately prophetic. Investigators, prison officials, and Rafiq's family were left grappling with the painful realization that the tragedy could have been prevented if his warnings had been taken seriously. Legal consequences followed for his killer. Barry Mundell was convicted of murder and sentenced to 23 years in prison. The case exposed severe shortcomings in prison safety protocols and triggered an internal review of how inmate complaints are handled. The Prisons and Probation Ombudsman issued a strong critique of the system that had failed Rafiq, recommending reforms to complaint procedures and oversight to prevent similar tragedies. HMP Hewell revised its handling of confidential complaints to ensure letters are not left unopened due to administrative gaps. However, procedure reforms on paper do not erase the human loss. Rafiq's family spoke publicly about his warnings, insisting that if the prison had acted, he might still be alive. The tragedy of Adnan Rafiq remains a haunting reminder of the consequences of neglect and disbelief. For staff, it became a moment of painful introspection, questioning whether bias against prisoners had prevented them from taking threats seriously. For the wider public, it raises an unsettling question. If a man behind bars can foresee his own violent end and warn of it in writing, what does it say about the systems that fail to protect him? His voice, finally heard after death, serves as a stark reminder that warnings are not always mere fears. Sometimes they are truths waiting to unfold. How many more such warnings go unread before it is too late?